Hey everyone, Ted here. You might have noticed that I haven't uploaded in a while. Okay, who am I kidding? That is completely on brand for me. But aside from my normal excuses, college, medical stuff, etc., I actually have a good reason this time. I, once again, bit off way more than I could chew. I decided, after seeing a bunch of stuff pop up on YouTube about lore and timelines and everything, I was going to do a video explaining the entirety of the Elder Scrolls timeline. And I thought, that can't be that hard. How much stuff could be in there? Lot. Oh my gosh. Anyway, this took several months of writing, recording, and editing. I've made it one of my New Year's resolutions to try and upload a video once a month, and I've already fallen behind on that, but we're good at goes. So next time I'm doing something much, much more manageable. So anyway, here's this feature film-length video explaining the entire lore of the Elder Scrolls. In the beginning, before the creation of the universe and time, there were two cosmic forces, Anu, which embodied order and stasis, and Padamai, which embodied chaos and change. Being opposing forces, the two acted in perpetual conflict with each other, though it's important to note that these are not gods per se. They have no consciousness, and they are simply inanimate forces acting as they are. Except for in the mythology of the Yakuten people, who personified these forces as Sadakal, the world serpent, a giant Ouroboros continuously eating itself and creating and destroying the universe perpetually. Anyway, eventually two souls manifest from Anu and Padamai. Anuiel, the soul of and is born from Anu, and embodies light, everything, infinity, and possibility. And Sithis is the soul of and born from Padmai, which embodied darkness, limitation, nothing, destruction, and entropy. While Anuiel and Sithis do possess souls, they are animate entities, but they are not gods in the traditional sense. They lack an ego and are generally depicted as being a state of pseudo-consciousness, though this will be very inconsistent later. At first, Anuel and Sithis clash like their predecessors, but after realizing this isn't getting them anywhere, they compromise and agree to create a universe from the interplay of Anu, Padmai, Anuel, and Sithis. This becomes the Arbus, the Grey Maybe. Then, similar to how they were formed from Anu and Padmai, these two beings manifest souls themselves. These souls would become known by many names, but for now we're going to call them Akka and Lorcan. These are the first fully conscious beings and are the first of the Ed-Ada, or original spirits, which are the gods of the Elder Scrolls universe. Akka then creates time, bringing order to the Arbus and allowing the other Ed-Ada to come to know themselves. At this point, there are two realms within the Arbus, the Anuic realm of Aetherius and the Padmaic realm of Oblivion. And each of the Ed-Ada come to inhabit one of these realms, and most of them begin to create their own subplanes within these realms. At some point, the Ed-Ada begin to create lesser spirits to inhabit these realms and for them to rule over. The most important ones for right now are the dragons, which Akka creates in his own image. And before any of you hardcore Elder Scrolls fans butt in with your, actually, bam, primary sources. Lesser Aedra do exist. Dragons are Lesser Aedra, and the Lesser Aedra were created by the Daedric princes, and by extension, the Lesser Aedra were created by the Greater Aedra. But some of the Ed-Ada weren't satisfied with only two infinite planes in the universe. So, Lorcan proposed to the Ed-Ada the creation of a third plane, Mundus, which is also sometimes going to be referred to as Nirn interchangeably, even though Nirn is the main planet, the center of Mundus that everything takes place on. The Ed-Ada that dwelled in Oblivion declined. These would become known as the Daedric Princes. They include Azura, the goddess of dust, dawn, and prophecies. She's also considered the epitome of vanity, but despite this, she's actually by far the nicest of the Daedric Princes, which actually isn't saying much, but still, she's actually pretty decent. Boethia, the prince of plots, deceit, conspiracy, revolution, murder, and pretty much anything that involves lying and or killing. Clavicus Vile, the god of pacts, bargains, wishes, and power, who's just your run-of-the-mill supernatural trickster, your Loki, your Jinn, type of thing. Hermaeus Mora, the god of forbidden, hidden, and esoteric knowledge, fate, and from the looks of him, possibly a certain subgenre of Japanese media. Her scene, who is the creator of lycanthropy and the god of the hunt. Though that title is misleading, since sometimes when he says hunt, he actually means hunt. But sometimes when he says hunting, it's him not understanding that when your prey is people, that's no longer hunting, that's murder. Jigalag, the Daedric prince of perfect order and logic, and almost certainly has OCD. Mephala, the god of sex, lies, secrets, and murder. Her sphere shares a lot of commonalities with Boethia, but the main difference is she's more about the lies and secrets and deception aspect, where Boethia is more just about the violence. Mehun's Dagon, the Daedric prince of destruction, energy, disasters, ambition, and revolution. He's your stereotypical chaotic evil entity. Molag Bal, who is basically the devil. He's the Daedric prince of domination, enslavement, brutality, cruelty, schemes, and corruption, and is the devourer of souls. He's your obligatory Satan parallel. Your Morgoth, your Sauron, your Asmodeus, your Mephisto, etc. Namira, the Daedric prince of rot, decay, darkness, cannibalism, and all things mortals find repulsive. If thinking about it makes you want to cringe or vomit, it's in her sphere. Nocturnal, the goddess of the night, shadows, luck, and thieves. Period, the god of disease, pestilence, and natural order. Sanguine, the Daedric prince of hedonism, revelry, debauchery, excess, and indulgences of darker natures. And finally, we have Vermina. She is the Daedric prince of dreams, nightmares, visions, and dark omens. The creations of these princes became known as Lesser Daedra. Again, before you say anything, primary sources. There are also Daedric lords, which fall between the Daedric princes and Lesser Daedra in power. The most notable of these is Hollowjack, the Daedric Lord of Fear, though he's only important for the Halloween event in Elder Scrolls Online, which is to say not at all. The other Errata agreed to partake in the creation of Mundus, losing most of their power in the process. They become known as the Aedra. One of these Aedra, known as Magnus, abandons the creation of Mundus partway through and returns to Aetherius, tearing a hole between the planes of existence, which becomes known as the sun. Other weaker Aedra follow him, creating the stars. They become known as the Magnagi, or Children of Magnus. And from there, it gets complicated. You see, each culture has its own mythology with its own version of the creation myth. And while they've been pretty consistent up to this point, this is where they start to vary pretty drastically, depending on which version you hear. And each of these different cultures' versions are vague and open to different interpretations themselves. Anyway, according to the Elven and Yakudian versions of the creation myth, Lorkhan did not tell the Aedra that creating Mundus would cost them most of their power, and the creation of Mundus was a trick to trap the Aedra in a prison of death and limitation, with the lesser Aedra becoming known as the Elnathe, becoming mortal, with a couple of exceptions, most notably the dragons. And again, yes, dragons are lesser Aedra. Here are sources. And the greater Aedra losing most of their power. The Aedra put Lorkhan on trial, found him guilty, and sentenced him to death. This led to a war between the Greater Aedra and the Elnathe that supported them, and Lorkhan and the Elnathe that were corrupted by him and supported him. The Elnathe that supported the Aedra became known as the Old Elnathe, and the Aedra that supported Lorkhan became known as the Wandering Elnathe. Eventually, the Aedra won, and Akka kills Lorkhan, whipping out his heart and casting it into the sea, from which the Isle of Ardenfell and Red Mountain will eventually grow. After this, since the creation of Mundus can't be undone, the Greater Aedra see through finishing the creation of Mundus and stabilizing it, giving up most of their remaining power and their physical forms, with their realms/bodies becoming the planets that orbit Narn, and their souls returning to Aetherius. Whereas, according to the human version, the Aedra were aware of the sacrifice creating Narn would require, but Lorkhan convinced them to do it anyways, convincing them to sacrifice much of their power and selves to help create something greater than any single one of them. In this version, humans and elves weren't descended from Lesser Aedra, they were created by the Greater Aedra along with Mundus, and the creation of these mortal children was the main reason that the Aedra agreed to create Mundus in the first place. However, some of the Aedra were disappointed and discontent with the final result, and they became resentful of Lorkhan. Chief among these being Akka, or at least the elven version of Akka. At some point, the humans start to see the version of Akka that they worship and the version of Akka that the elves worship as two separate entities. This becomes even more complicated later due to a certain cult and a certain monkey. Anyway, these Aedra murder Lorkhan, and this starts a war between the anti-Lorkhan Aedra, which are led by the elven version of Akka, and the pro-Lorkhan Aedra, which are led by the human version of Akka. This might seem contrived and not make a lot of sense. I feel like they kind of made up for the narrative, but this will make sense later because, again, monkey. And if that didn't make sense to you, it will later in the video. Anyway, the mortals that followed the pro-Lorcan Aedra became the Wandering Elnifei, and the mortals that followed the anti-Lorcan Aedra became the Old Elnifei. Eventually, the Old Elnifei and their gods are pushed back down into the south, and the gods eventually ascend into Aetherius. This is a brief overview and tried to consolidate the compatible sources and interpretations. It's unclear what account is true and if any of them are. And on top of that, linear time has not been established yet, so multiple versions of events can happen and all be true. So while time exists, it's how to explain this? Well, I'll just let David Tennant explain it.
People don't understand time. It's not what you think it is.
Then what is it?
Complicated.
Tell me.
Very complicated.
Tell me.
People assume that time is a strict progression of cause to effect, but actually, from a non-linear, non-subjective viewpoint, it's more like a big ball of wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff.
So basically, the Aedra and the events of the creation of Mundus exist in a state of quantum uncertainty, where events can be true and false and both and neither simultaneously. Again,
wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey.
So everything I said could be right, or none of it could be right, or parts of it could, and which parts of it are right are subject to change. Anyway, let's talk about the Aedra again. Each culture has its own versions of them, and again, there is no saying which one's right, and multiple might be right, and none of them might be right. So anyway, this then gets even more complicated with Akka specifically, like I said before. So anyway, let's start off with the Cyrodiilic pantheon, the 8 divines, which is the main human pantheon from the late First Era onward, and I'm going to be using this one as our basis of comparison since it's the most prominent pantheon during the Third and Fourth Era, which is when most of the games are set. It was the first one that Bethesda created, appearing back in Daggerfall with the other ones appearing later. And it often seems like it's the only one Bethesda remembers exists. First, there's Shazar, the god of mortals and the missing sibling of the divines. He is the Cyrodiilic version of Lorcan. And then there's Akatosh, the Cyrodiilic version of Akka. He is the king of the divines after Lorcan's death, and he's the dragon god of time. Arkay, the god of the cycle of life and death and burial rites. Dibella, the goddess of beauty, love, and passion, and the arts. Julianos, the god of logic, wisdom, and scholarship, and also a patron of mages. Kinnereth, the goddess of the sky, wind, nature, and air. Mara, the mother goddess of love, compassion, fertility, and family, and is also the wife of Akatosh. Stendar, the god of mercy, charity, righteous authority, and justice. And Zenithar, the god of labor, commerce, and trade. Some Cyrodiilic texts also mention Auriel, the elven version of Akka, who, remember, they see as separate from Akatosh, where he is mentioned as Shazar's murderer. Next, let's move on to the Aldmeri or Elven Pantheon. The head of the Aldmeri Pantheon is Auriel, the first king of the Old Elnifei, and the elven version of Akka, and he's also the god of time. And then there's Trinimac, the elven god of war, justice, and heroism, and was the knight of Auriel. Xerxes, the Aldmeri god of knowledge, and the scribe of Auriel, who records all of elven history and elven bloodlines, which is important since heritage is everything in most elven cultures. According to some sources, he is the elven counterpart of Arkay. Mara, who is identical to her Cyrodiilic version. Magnus, who we've already discussed, who the elves worship as a god of magic. And Stendar, who the elves believe is the apologist of men. The Wood Elves would eventually come to also worship a god of work and agriculture named Zen, a version of the god Zenithar, who is a god of either human, Argonian, or Akaviri origin. Next, let's move on to the Nordic pantheon, starting with Shor. He is the Nordic version of Lorcan and is the god of humanity and war, who was killed leading the Nords in battle against the oppressive elven gods, and now resides over Stavangard, the Hall of the Honored Dead. Then there is Kine, the Nordic version of Kinnereth. She is the warrior goddess of storms, queen of the Nordic gods, mother of the Nordic people, and widow of Shor. Mara, who is almost identical to the Cyrodiilic and elven versions, except she is not associated with Akka in any way and is the handmaiden of Kine. Bella, who is almost identical to a Theodoric version, except she is also the concubine of Shor here. Dun, the god of ransom, and Shield Thane of Shor, who is the Nordic version of Stendar. Sun, a counterpart of Zen and Zenithar, who is the god of trials, endurance, and the overcoming of adversity. He is the brother of Stern and Shield Thane of Shor, who died defending him from the Elven Guards and now guards the entrance to Sovngarde. Then there is Junal, the Nordic counterpart of Julianos, the god of wisdom, logic, and magic, and Orki, the god of death and mortality and enemy of the Nordic gods. He is a demonized counterpart to Arcane Xerxes. And finally, there's Alduin, the World Eater and dragon god of the end times. He is either an amalgamation of Akka and the dragon Alduin, the first dragon that was created by Akka and a demigod of the end of times, or Alduin is part of Akka while also being his son, in a similar way to like how the Holy Trinity works in Christianity. Anyway, to the Nords, he is the god of the end times. Trinimac and Oriel are also referenced in Nordic mythology, specifically as leaders of the enemy gods. Next up, we have the Yakutan pantheon. First up, there is the head of the Yukon pantheon, Luktpa, also known as Tall Papa because he has a lot of children, who created the walkabout, a way for spirits to survive the death and rebirth of the universe caused by Sadakal eating itself. He is the Yakutan version of Akka. Then there is Sep, the Yakutan version of Lorcan, who was created by Luktpa from the dead skin of Sadakal to help him guide the souls through the walkabout when there became too many souls for him to be able to guide alone. Sep was corrupted by the hunger he inherited from Sadakal and tricked the gods and spirits into creating the mortal world, seeking to weaken the gods and make the spirits mortal. For this, Rigtpa crushed him with a giant stick. Then there's Tuwaka. He was originally the god of no one really cares. This is not a joke, that is actually what he was god of. But Rigtpa made him the caretaker of the far shores, the Yakun afterlife, and the guardian of the dead. He is the Yakun counterpart to Orki, Arke, and Xerxes. Then there is Zet, the son of Ruktpa and god of agriculture, farming, and labor. He is the Yakun version of Zenithar. And then there is Mora. She is the Yakutan version of Mara and is almost identical to her Elven and Serodoric versions. Next, there is Tava. She is the goddess of the sky and the counterpart of Kain/Kinnereth. Then there is Leki, the daughter of Ruktpa and goddess of swordsmanship, who does not have a counterpart in any of the other Tamaric religions. Then there is Onsai, another god of swordsmanship, and then there is Hunding, the make-way god, and the god of the Yakun spirit of perseverance, who was taken many forms and avatars, both mortal and immortal. Finally, we have Diagna, an avatar of Hunding, which achieved permanence and divinity in his own right, and is also the god of swordsmanship and war. Finally, we have the Khajiit pantheon. Now, they are different as they don't distinguish between Aedra and Daedra, instead classifying all of them as spirits and dividing them into 4 categories. Sky spirits, including Azura, who the Khajiit see as a mother figure. Kinarthi, their version of Kain and Kinnereth, is the goddess of the wind and carries the Khajiit to the afterlife. Magres, their version of Magnus, who is the god of the sun and sorcery. And Joan and Jode, who are the deified versions of Nern's moons, Masser, and Secunda. Then there's the worldly spirits, Hermora, which is just their name for Hermaeus Mora, Hersine, Sangan, who is a conflation of Sanguine and Mephala, and Nerni, which is the personification of Nern. Then there are the wandering spirits, consisting of Akka, with the Pathfinder, who explored something called the Many Paths. He is most likely their version of Anuiel. Then there is Alkosh, the Dragon King of Cats and the God of Time. If you haven't guessed, he is the Khajiit version of Akatosh. Then there is Alkan, the Khajiit version of Alduin and the son of Akka, and is considered the offspring of him and a demon. Boethra, which is their name for Boethia, and Mephala. Then there is the dark spirits, including Namira, who the Khajiit conflated with and associated with Sithis and believe claims the souls of corrupted Khajiit when they die. Noctra, which is their name for nocturnal, and Vermina, their version of Vermeera. Finally, there are the adversarial spirits, including Mayrunes, which is their version of Mayrunes Dagon, Molog, which is their version of Molog Baal, Orca, which is their version of Orki, and Lorcas, which is their version of Lorcan. Anyway, in the end, the results are all the same. Lorcan or Shazar is dead. The other Aedra are only mostly dead, being in Aetherius. And finally, at the end of all this, Akka makes time linear, ending the Dawn Era and making time work like it should and like we all know it to, starting the Merethic Era. At some point during the Dawn Era, or the early Merethic Era, the Daedric prince Jiggalag becomes increasingly powerful and influential, becoming a threat to the other Daedric princes. In response to this, the other princes come together to curse Jiggalag, turning him into Sheogorath, the Daedric Prince of Madness, his own absolute antithesis. Also, side note, at some point Sheogorath most likely had a demigod daughter who became the demi-prince of pastries. This won't come up ever again. I just wanted you to know that. Before this, time didn't work like we know it to work in the real world, so every interpretation of events prior to this is canon. But now that time works the way we all know it works, for the most part, I will get to that later, things get a little easier. So, anyway, the Dawn War left the wandering Elnafe scattered across the northern continent of Atmora, the eastern continent of Akavir, and the western continent of Yakuta, and possibly also the central continent of Tamriel, depending on what you believe the origins of the Ringi to believe, and some of the obscure beast folks also might be related to the wandering Elderfae. But at this point, the mortal plane is still unstable and chaotic, so a powerful old Elderfae named Yifri sacrifices himself to help stabilize the world, kind of like what the Aedra did. Many others follow in his footsteps, becoming the Earthbones. After this, the Hist, a sentient network of trees, supposedly created by Sithis, start putting parts of their essence into lizards, turning them into the Argonians, or lizard folk. At some point during the Merethic Era, two Magna Gi, Meridnunda and Athelia, consort with Daedra and get cast out of Aetherius, becoming the two new Daedric princes. Meridnunda becomes Meridia, the Daedric prince of light, life, and energies, and takes the bronze medal among the Daedric princes in not being an entirely evil sociopath. And Aetheria becomes seen as a threat by Hermaeus Mora and some of the other Daedric princes, who banish her from the Orbis and erase all evidence of her existence, including memories. At some point, the Aldmer begin to leave Aldmeris, their ancestral homeland and the southern continent of Narn. Some end up in Yakuta, where they become known as the Sinister Elves, also known as Left-Handed Elves. That is not a joke. I am not making that up. That is canon. A quick note here. While editing this, I learned that sinister is actually the Latin word for left, and its modern meaning in English just comes from the old superstition that being left-handed is a sign of demonic possession. That's crazy. Like, I took 2 semesters of Latin in college, and I did not know that. Others settle in underground cities in northern Tamriel and become known as the Dwemer, or Deep Elves. They also get called Dwarves later on, but that name was given to them by Atmorans, who were significantly taller than all the other races, so they would have seen everyone as dwarves. Others end up on the Somerset Isles in southern Tamriel. At some point, some Atmorans cross the Sea of Ghosts and settle in northwestern and central Tamriel. Over time, they evolve into the Nedic people. At some point, the Aldmer of Somerset Isles go looking for Aldmeris again after losing it, and they find Tamriel. After this, some Aldmer start to migrate to Tamriel. Some move to the forests of southwestern Tamriel, which will become known as Valenwood, where they enter into a covenant with Yifri, where in exchange for his protection, they swore to protect and never harm the plants of Valenwood. Some of the Wood Elves also came to settle in what would be known as Elsewhere, which is east of Valenwood, where one day, the Daedric Prince Azora shows up, turns them into furries for no discernible reason, and then refuses to elaborate and bails. And that's how we get the Khajiit. Other Aldmer went to northern Tamriel, where they became the Falmer, or Snow Elves, and others settled in the heartland of Tamriel, which they called Cyrod, and would later become known as Cyrodiil. These elves became known as the Aelids, or Heartland High Elves. At some point, a Aldmer prophet in the Somerset Isles named Velorf started advocating the abandonment of Aldmeri culture and beliefs and the worship of the Daedric princes Azura, Berethia, and Mephala, which he called the Good Daedra. Now, it's worth noting that two of these quote-unquote Good Daedra are guards of murder, lies, deception, and violence, which aren't necessarily stuff I would classify as good things, but what the hell do I know? Veloth leads his followers on an exodus to northeastern Tamriel, which they called Red State. A group of knights dedicated to Trinamac try to stop them, and an aspect of Trinamac even appears to intervene, but then Berethia and Mephala appear and defeat Trinamac, and Berethia eats Trinamac and poops him out. Again, this is not a joke, this is actually canon. And this creates Malkath, the Daedric prince of the spurned and ostracized and a god of vengeance. His followers that were there become the first orcs. As all this stuff was happening, despite their best efforts, the Aldmer that lived in the Somerset Isles had begun to develop and change from the Aldmer that first settled it, and thus had become a new culture which would become known as the Altmer or High Elves. At some point, the Durrani clan of High Elves left the Somerset Isles and settled northwestern Tamriel, which would become known as High Rock, where they conquered and imperialized and quote-unquote civilized the Needs of the area. Some of the Needs resisted, they get pushed into the western region known as the Reach, and become known as the Reachmen. And while this sounds like really, really bad, this is actually one of the better interactions between men and elves early on. Meanwhile, the Aelids begin to greatly expand and conquer and enslave the various Neac tribes of central Tamriel. At this time, many of the Aelid city-states began to worship Daedra. This gave them powerful boons in Daedric armies and also led to them becoming even more depraved and sadistic, torturing their slaves for their Daedric gods and also just their own amusement and the quote-unquote art of it, because elves are the worst. Meanwhile, after a while, the Durrani nobles started having affairs and illegitimate children with the Needic people that they ruled over. After a few centuries, this gave way to a new race, the Bretons. At some point, the Tasasi, a race of snake people, possibly related to humans, they drove the dragons out of Akavir, and the dragons relocated to Skyrim and Atmora. Now, at this point in time, the Atmorans worshipped a pantheon of totem animals, which each roughly equated to a different Aedra. And the dragon was the top of this pantheon for, well, obvious reasons. But over time, the worship of dragons started to eclipse the veneration of the other totems. And the dragons were all for this, since they have a natural desire to dominate. So, as the Atmorans started to worship and venerate them more and more, the dragons took full advantage of this. At some point, another group of Atmorans, led by a man named Ysgramor, landed in northern Tamriel and built a city which became known as Sarthal. These Atmorans coexisted peacefully with the Falmer. This, however, changed when an event known as the Night of Tears came, where the Falmer surprise attacked Starthal and killed everyone in it, with the only survivors being Ysgramor and his two sons. Now, why the Falmer did this is unknown. The Atmorans and later the Nords believed that the elves feared the growing power of humanity and decided to take care of it now before it became a problem. However, another possible explanation is that the Atmorans had discovered an ancient artifact known as the Eye of Magnus, a powerful artifact which offered near limitless magic power. And the Falmer feared what the Atmorans could do with the eye, or what might happen unintentionally when they try to use it. After the Night of Tears, Ysgramor returns to Atmora and told everyone what happened. He raises an army of 500 companions and wages war on the Snow Elves. The Atmorans get their revenge on the Snow Elves, maybe going a bit too far, driving them to near extinction. The surviving Falmer sought refuge with the Dwemer, who agreed to shelter them, but only if they ate a fungus that made them blind. Within a few generations, the Falmer evolved into a race of blind, feral, subhuman creatures that the Dwemer subsequently enslaved. Because elves are the worst. The Atmorans set up a kingdom in the territory they conquered that would become known as Skyrim, and these Atmorans would eventually become known as the Nords. At some point, Alduin, the first dragon, and a demigod created by Akatosh to be the herald of the end of times, united all of the dragons under his rule, forming them into a civilization. The civilization began to take advantage of the Nords even more, with them ruling over them as god kings, leading to the dragon cult ruling over the Nords as vassals to the dragons. As the dragons and their priest's reign became more and more tyrannical over time under Arnold's influence, the Nords eventually rebelled against them. This rebellion was hopelessly outmatched until the gods intervened. Kine got one of the dragons, Parthenax, to switch sides and give the Nords the knowledge of the Thuum, the powerful form of magic that the dragons used. At some point, the first of the Dragonborns, mortals blessed with the blood and soul of a dragon by Akka, emerged. This Dragonborn, named Merethic, was destined to defeat Alduin, but he rejected his destiny and joined the Dragon Cult to gain more power. Till he betrayed them to serve the Daedric Prince Hermaeus Mora in pursuit of even more power. Specifically, he sought knowledge on how to use the Thuum to bend beings, even dragons, to his will. This betrayal led to a battle between Merethic and a dragon priest known as Velok. This battle was so intense that it split part of Skyrim off the mainland, becoming the island of Solstheim. During this battle, Merethic was almost killed, but at the last second, Hermaeus Mora pulled him into Apocrypha, his realm of oblivion, saving him, but trapping him and forcing him to do Mora's bidding for the rest of time. Around the same time, 3 Nords, who would become known as the First Tongues, mastered the Thuum, and used this knowledge to create a new Thuum, Dragonrend, which could be used to weaken dragons. Using this shout, the Nords began to slay the dragons. Eventually, the Tongues tried to defeat Alduin, but even with Dragonrend, he was still too powerful to be defeated, so they used an Elder Scroll to send him forward in time, and then proceeded to tell no one about this, and just let everyone think Alduin was dead. This surely won't come back to bite them in the ass later. The Nords then continued to hunt down and kill the dragons, driving them to near extinction. At this point, some of the dragons decided to go and try and conquer elsewhere. Their leader, Calgrundid, wanted to absorb the power of the moons, which he believed would make him as powerful as Akka. These dragons were defeated by the Khajiit hero Kunzuri by tricking them into unintentionally letting the moons take most of their power, and then going into ancient ruins known as the Halls of the Colossus, which he then sealed them inside. Around the same time as the war between the dragons and the Nords, there was a civil war known as the Narfacel Schism, which broke out in the Aelid Empire between the Aedra-worshipping city-states and the Daedra-worshipping city-states. While all of this was happening on Tamriel, the Sinister Elves and the Yakudans were fighting each other over control of Yakuda. The Yakudans also fought each other over who would lead them against the Sinister Elves, until one day, one of their gods, Leki, the daughter of Rugtpa, and Diagna, one of the aspects of their god Hunding, intervened, giving them orc-elk weapons as well as helping them choose a leader. After this, the Yakudans were able to defeat the left-handed elves and drive them off the continent. At some point in the late Merethic Era, simply to spite the Aedra Archaea, the Daedric Prince Molagbal, let's just say he did something very, very bad that's sexual in nature and that I am not comfortable saying on YouTube, to a priestess of Archaea, turning her into the first vampire who would later become known as Lamebal. After all of this stuff happened, at some point the Cameron dynasty comes to power in Valenwood, and came to the conclusion that it might be a good idea to start keeping dates, and thus begins recorded history and the First Era. In the early First Era, an extremely powerful Nordic mage known as Shalador purchases the island of Iadive from the Altmer and made it into a sanctuary for all mages and those who wanted to study the arcane arts. At some point between the first and 461st years of the First Era, the orc chieftain Turig Gorolugron, man that is hard to pronounce, found an orcish kingdom in the Hrothgar Mountains, which would become known as Orsinium. During the first few decades of the First Era, a monastic order known as the Sigic Order was founded in the Somerset Isles, both to preserve the practice of ancestor and spirit worship, which had fallen out of favor among the Altmer, and to help guide the people of Tamriel, believing that Padamai was not a good or evil force, but a neutral force of change that could be harnessed for good or bad and needed to be guided properly. During the first century of the First Era, the final Nordic migration from Atmora to Skyrim takes place, and Atmora is all but abandoned. During the second century of the First Era, Harold, a distant descendant of Ysgramor, unifies Nords under his rule, becoming the first High King and consolidating Skyrim into a single unified kingdom. During his reign, the Nords discovered the last holdouts of the Dragon Cult and destroyed them, and a remnant of the Snow Elf Empire on Solstheim, and they destroyed them too. After a century of war, the Narfacel Schism finally ends, with the Scouring of Wendelbeck, with the Daedra-worshipping Aelids being victorious and the Aedra-worshipping Aelids being driven out of their heartlands southeast into the border region of Blackwood and into Blackmarsh. Throughout the 3rd century of the Third Era, the Kingdom of Skyrim expands, conquering most of mainland Redstein and eastern High Rock, creating the Nordic Empire. In the year 242 of the First Era, the Aedra answered the enslaved needs' prayers for liberation. Akka made a Nidic woman, who would become known as Alicia or Lesh, Dragonborn, and bestowed to her the Amulet of Kings, an amulet containing the crystallized blood of either Akka or Lokon or both, forming the Elysian Covenant. As long as a Dragonborn wears the Amulet of Kings and rules over the Men of Cyrodiil, and the Men of Cyrodiil remain faithful to the Aedra, then something known as the Dragonfires will remain lit, and as long as they are lit, the Aedra will maintain a barrier between Mundus and Oblivion, restricting the dangerous interference in the mortal world, which seems needlessly convoluted and complicated, but I'm sure it's going to be fine and it won't cause any issues going forward. With the loss of the aid of the Aedra, the Aelids were significantly weakened and the Needs revolted against them. The Aedra also sent 2 champions to help them in their revolt. Morehouse, a winged man bull that was the demigod son of Kine, and Pelnal Whitestreak, a nomadic warrior known as the Divine Crusader, who may or may not have been an avatar of Lorcan. With the help of the gods as well as aid from the Nordic Empire and some traitor Aelid city-states, the Elysians defeated the Aelids, with Pelnal Whitestreak defeating the greatest of the Aelid sorcerer kings and demigod Umril the Unfeathered. However, Umril had made a bargain with the Daedric prince Meridia, so upon the death of his physical body, his soul was drawn to Meridia's realm, where he regenerated and awaited his chance to exact revenge. After the Elysians won, they founded the Elysian Empire, also known as the First Empire. Even though the Nords already had a human empire, but okay. The emancipated Needs became known as the Imperials. However, there was a problem. Many of the emancipated Needs and many of the Aelids that allied with them had worshipped the Aldmeri pantheon. However, the Nords worshipped their own pantheon, and many of the humans were not willing to accept the blatantly anti-human sentiments of the Aldmeri theology, and the Aelids wouldn't accept the blatantly anti-elven sentiments of Nordic theology. To rectify this, Alesia combined the Nordic and Aldmeri pantheon, combining any 2 deities from the different pantheons that were interpretations of the same overall deity, to form the Imperial Pantheon of the 8 Divines. In the process, also toning down or straight up removing any racist or extremely violent aspects of both religions. Akka became known as Akatosh, the dragon god of time and law and patron of the empire. Orki was combined with either Finaster or Xerxes, becoming Arche, the god of the cycle of birth, life, and death, and funeral rites. Diabella stayed the same. Junal became Julianos, the god of wisdom, logic, and scholarship. Kine became Kinnereth, the god of the wind and sky, and nature. Mara stayed the same. Stendar and Stern were combined to become Stendar, the god of mercy, justice, and righteous forbearance, and Zen and Stern became Zenithar, the god of labor and commerce. After that, Alesia and Morahouse got together and had children, and that's where Minotaurs came from. That poor woman. Anyway, seeking freedom from the Dureni, a group of druids in High Rock left to settle on the High Isles. At some point, an Imga, a race of sentient apes, claimed to be visited by the ghost of Alesia and proclaimed himself a prophet, and started to make a bunch of additions and alterations to religious doctrine that completely went against what it originally said. Despite these crazy claims, people actually started listening to him for some reason. Though I shouldn't be surprised, this is basically just what Mormonism is. Wow, going after Mormons, so brave. Anyway, eventually his teachings caught on and created the religious sect known as the Elysian Order, which was known for promoting extreme anti-elven sentiment. The Elysian Order eventually evolved into a monotheistic religion, worshipping an abstract god known as the One, with the divines being redefined as lesser spirits in service to a great supreme spirit. By 361 of the First Era, the Elysian Order grows so influential that it seizes control of the empire from the emperors, and its doctrines become law. Around this time, they also start spreading their faith and influence throughout the rest of Tamriel, most notably Skyrim and High Rock. Around the same time, King Borgus, the last of Ysgramor's bloodline, dies, plunging Skyrim into civil war. With Elysian Order in power in Cyrodiil, they start instituting anti-elven policies, stripping the land and noble titles from the remaining Aelid nobles. They also began to attempt to remove what they called Aldmeri taint from imperial society and religion. This eventually led to pogroms against elves throughout the empire, causing the remaining Aelids to flee to Valenwood and the Duenni-controlled regions of High Rock. Meanwhile, in Yakuta, the Yakutan emperor is overthrown and the continent is plunged into centuries of civil war. The Kaimer and Dwemer take advantage of this weakened state of the Nords and unite to form the First Council to drive the Nords out of Redstein, with the exception of one clan of Dwemer who choose to exile themselves to Hammerfell. In 420, nice, of the First Era, the Skyrim's War of Succession ends with the Pact of Chieftains, however only after the Nords lost most of their territory in High Rock and Redstein. Over the next few decades, the Durenni expand to take control of the entirety of High Rock and parts of Hammerfell. In 478 of the First Era, Clovia, the western half of Cyrodiil, rebels against the Elysian Empire, gaining support from the Durenni and the Nords, who had also come into conflict with the Elysians. Following the Elysians' defeat in Clovia, the Durenni succeed in driving the Elysian Order and any influence it had out of High Rock. This leads to open war between the Elysian Empire and Durenni, culminating in the Elysians' defeat by the combined force of Bretons, Durenni, Nords, and remaining Aelids at the Battle of the Number of Moors. During the battle, the Nord king, Horeg Moorkiller, dies, and Wulfharth, later known by the title Ysmir, meaning Dragon of the North, takes the throne. During his reign, the Elysian Order and all other elements of imperial religion are driven out of Skyrim, and he reinstates the traditional Nordic pantheon. By 500 of the First Era, the Durenni have lost power, retreating to their seat of power on the island of Balfuria, leaving the Bretons to inherit High Rock. In 660 of the First Era, a remnant of the left-handed elves land in the High Isles and attempt to conquer them. In 688, the Dwemer discover the Heart of Lorkhan and decide to use it to create their own god. The Kaimer discover this and consider it blasphemy, something the Kaimer have never done in their history, and they declare war on the Dwemer. During the climax of the war, known as the Battle of Red Mountain, the Dwemer attempt to activate their living god, and this goes about as well as you'd expect trying to play God would go, and the Dwemer all disappear simultaneously from existence. According to one account, the Nords learned that the Dwemer had found the Heart of Lorkhan and attacked the Kaimer and Dwemer to claim the heart to return it to Shor. Shor's ghost appeared and brought Ysmir Wulfharth back to life to lead the Nords in this battle, and the Nords were defeated by the Kaimer, and Wulfharth was slain again, this time turning to ash. This left the leaders of the Kaimer with the Heart of Lorkhan. And what happens next is tricky, since the tampering with the Heart of Lorkhan caused a dragon break, an event where time fractures before grafting itself back together again, causing multiple different contradictory events to all occur. This means that all of the different contradictory accounts of what happened next are canon. All the accounts of what happened following the war involve someone betraying someone else, but in the end, they all converge on the king of the Kaimer, Indril Nerevar, being killed by someone. His wife, Armalexia, and his two closest advisors, Silphasil and Vivek, used the Heart of Lorkhan to become living gods, known as the Tribunal, and rule over the Kaimer as god kings. Nerevar's other friend, Vorin Dagoth, also uses the heart to achieve godhood and goes insane, and is defeated by the Tribunal. As punishment for forsaking her, Azura pulls a Book of Borman and turns the Kaimer's skin dark, turning them into the Dunmer or Dark Elves, and warns that one day Nerevar will be reincarnated and exact retribution on the Tribunal and Dagoth. After the Nords' defeat at Red Mountain, a tongue named Jorgen Windcaller reflected to seek answers to why the power of the voice had failed. After much contemplation, he believed that the Nords had grown arrogant and were misusing the Thu'um. He created a philosophy known as the Way of the Voice, which held that the voice should only be used for the glory of the gods. Urin then went on to found the monastic order known as the Greybeards. In 676 of the First Era, Mount Firesong erupts on the High Isles, wiping out the invading left-handed elves as well as the druids that inhabited it. In 780 of the First Era, an individual named Hira seizes the throne of the Yakutan Empire and tries to consolidate power by wiping out the Sword Singers, practitioners of an ancient Yakutan art of swordsmanship. He was defeated when the legendary Yakutan warrior Frendar Hunding, who is believed to be an aspect of the god Hunding, definitely nothing confusing about that, rallied the remaining sword singers against Hira. After the war was won, Hunding and his followers went into exile, eventually being the first Yakutans to make it to Hammerfell, but not before stopping on the High Isles to finish their 99% genocide of the left-handed elves. In 792 of the First Era, the continent of Yakuta sinks into the sea, presumably after a powerful sword singer attempted a legendary technique to try to win one of Yakuta's many civil wars. And the surviving Yakutas migrated to Hammerfell, where they proceeded to wipe out everything that wasn't them, including orcs, needs, elves, and beastfolk. Because, say it with me now, elves are the... Wait, no. Humans are the worst? No, that doesn't sound right either. Okay, elves are the worst, but humans can sometimes be pretty bad too. They become known as the Regatta, or Warrior Wave, which over the centuries will be corrupted into their martyr name of Redguard. The elves, needs, and beast folk of Hammerfell are completely wiped out, and the surviving orcs flee to Orsinium. In 950 of the First Era, the Breton city-states of Daggerfall, Sentinel, and the Redguards launch a joint attack on Orsinium, destroying it. In 1029 of the First Era, High Rock joins the Elysian Empire. In the 13th century of the First, after the Elysian Order failed to prove that Akatosh and Oriel were entirely separate beings, the leaders of the Elysian Order, known as the Mercari Selective, performed a ritual known as the Sacred Expulsion. They tried to separate Oriel, which they considered to be ordinary taint, from the rest of Akka, leaving Akatosh as the only version of Akka. This event caused a millennium-long dragon break, known as the Middle Dawn, and it is unclear if they actually succeeded in separating Oriel and Akatosh. In the year 2200 of the First Era, the Slode, a race of sentient slug creatures, released a disease known as the Thracian Plague onto Tamriel, wiping out half the population. In response to this, all of the peoples of Tamriel unite to form the All-Flags Navy and destroy the Slode's island kingdom of Thras. An Altmer mage known as Sirobane played a crucial role in the Navy's victory, and also did a bunch of other very impressive stuff, and is deified by the Altmer people. Keep this in mind because it will come up later. In the 23rd century of the First Era, Shalador loses Iadive in a bet to the Daedric Prince of Madness, Sheogorath, and it is pulled into his realm of the Shivering Isles. In 2305 of the First Era, High Rock secedes from the Empire. In 2321 of the First Era, a civil war known as the War of the Righteous breaks out in Cyrodiil, leading to the collapse of the Elysian Order and the Elysian Empire. And Cyrodiil is split into eastern and western halves. In 2703 of the First Era, the Tasasi, the race of snake people from Akavir, invaded Tamriel. In response, a dragonborn named Raymond Cyrodiil, who according to some accounts is a descendant of Alesia, unified Cyrodiil and led it against the Tasasi. When the Tasasi heard the voice of Raymond, they immediately recognized him as Dragonborn, and which the Tasasi saw as demigods, and bowed before him and swore themselves to Raymond and his bloodline. With the Tasasi army and a reunited Cyrodiil under his control, and being the savior of Tamriel, Raymond was able to quickly unify all of the kingdoms of men under his rule, creating the Second Empire. And the Tasasi warriors became the Dragon Guard, the Emperor's elite protectors. By 2714 of the First Era, the Second Empire had succeeded in conquering Valenwood and the Somerset Isles, and by 2837 it had conquered Blackmarsh, and around the same time it also conquered elsewhere. Around the same time, the Dragon Guard allied with the legendary Khajiit hero Jadari and the rogue dragon Nephilar to defeat Latvalon, one of Calgrundig's most powerful lieutenants who managed to avoid being imprisoned in the halls of the Colossus. They were unable to kill Latvalon, but were able to imprison him. In 2840, the Second Empire tries to conquer Morrowind, starting an 80-year conflict before the two empires finally call a truce. In 2920, the Daedric Prince Molag Bal destroys the city of Gilvardel in Valenwood, and the Daedric Prince Mehrunes Dagon destroys the city of Mournhold in Morrowind. In response, the tribunal member Sothasil calls a summit of the 8 most powerful and influential Daedric princes. I mean, strongest and weakest, nigh omnipotent being is kind of arbitrary, but okay. Those being Azura, Boethia, Hircine, Hermaeus Mora, Malakath, Mehrunes Dagon, Molag Bal, and Sheogorath. In exchange for some unknown concession or in response to some unknown threat made by Sothasil, the Daedric princes agreed to not directly interfere with the affairs of mortals. In 1920 of the First Era, Raymond Cyrodiil III and his son, Juliek, the last 2 members of Raymond Cyrodiil's bloodline, are assassinated by the Dunmeri Order of Assassins known as the Morag Tong. After their deaths, their chief advisor, the Tasasi Versa Dusay, becomes the ruler of the empire, starting a dynasty of Tasasi regions known as the Akave Potentate, and declares the start of the Second Era. For the next 2 centuries, the Potentate deals with civil wars within the empire, as many individuals and factions do not accept his rule. He also had to deal with many city-states and kingdoms seeking autonomy from the empire following the death of Raymond Cyrodiil. In 230, a member of the Sigic order named Varnus Galerian became fed up with the order's elitism and isolationist policies and founded the Mages Guild to centralize the study of magic across Tamriel and make knowledge of magic more accessible for the general public. The guild quickly spreads, eventually having a chapter in every major city on Tamriel. In the year 230 of the Second Era, the Daedric Triad, an alliance of the Daedric princes Clavicus, Viral, Nocturnal, and Mephala, conspire with the slowed Katora to steal the Heart of Transparent Law, a powerful relic, possibly even of Adric origin, from the Somerset Isles. The master of the Sigic Order uses esoteric magic to hide the heart, and shortly after, the Isle of Artaeum, the home of the Sigic Order, disappears from the mortal plane into a pocket realm. In 280 of the Second Era, the Empire gives control of the High Isles to the Bretons. In 283 of the Second Era, in response to the rebellion and infighting throughout the Empire, the Akave Potentate declares martial law and forces all regional lords and governments to disband their armies. In 309 of the Second Era, the marriage of the rulers of Elsewhere's 2 kingdoms unify the province, creating the Elsewhere Confederacy. In 311 of the Second Era, Ridhari-Datta, the cultural and spiritual leader of Elsewhere, had an epiphany, which led to a religious revolution in Elsewhere, leading to the Khajiit venerating Riddlethar, the cosmic order entity, which shaped modern Khajiiti philosophy and theology. In 312 of the Second Era, a clan of orcs invaded and conquered the Breton island of Betni, renaming it Betnik. Meanwhile, across the Empire, the whole martial law and no localized armies thing didn't really go too well, with a rise in bandits and brigands and other criminals. In response to this, the Potentate charters the Sithim, an organization of freelance warriors who the regional rulers could employ to keep the peace and uphold law in place of standing armies. This group would eventually evolve into the Fighters Guild. At some point prior to 358 of the Second Era, a splintered group of the Morag Tong devoted to Sithis, known as the Dark Brotherhood, is founded. During the 4th century of the Second Era, Orsinium is rebuilt and accepted into the Empire. In 430 of the Second Era, the last Akaviri Potentate, Savirin Koraka, is assassinated by the Dark Brotherhood, ending the Second Empire. In 431, after the death of High King Logroth of Skyrim, the Moot is divided on selecting his successor, and Skyrim is divided into an eastern and western kingdoms. With the Second Empire gone and Orsinium no longer having protected status, the Red Guards and Bretons lay siege to it again, this time completely driving the orcs out of the region. In 533 of the Second Era, the Reachman warlord known as Durakark, the Black Drake, conquers Cyrodiil and declares himself the new emperor, starting a dynasty known as the Longhouse Emperors. In 541, Durakark invades High Rock. Durakark is killed during this conflict, and his son Morikar takes the throne. Following the invasion by the Reachmen, the kingdoms of High Rock form a pact known as the Daggerfall Covenant to protect against foreign invaders. In 560 of the Second Era, a plague known as the Kanathatan flu breaks out in Black Marsh, wiping out the Kothringi, the native human civilization of Black Marsh. In 561, the Longhouse Emperors conspire with the Daedric prince Mehrunes Dagon to create the Four Ambitions, individuals with great power that Dagon hoped to use to merge Nirn and his realm of the Deadlands. In 564, Morikar attempts to invade Skyrim. The invading army is defeated, Morikar is injured and dies of his wounds shortly after. In 566 of the Second Era, the Breton kingdom of Shornhelm declares war on the neighboring kingdom of Waylest, after Emric, the king of Waylest, refuses the hand of Shornhelm's king's daughter in marriage. Eventually, the orcs and Red Guards get dragged into this, and after Shornhelm is defeated, the Breton kingdoms, the kingdoms of Hammerfell, and several orc tribes unite to form the Greater Daggerfall Covenant. In 572 of the Second Era, another Akaviri race, the Kamal, also known as the Snow Demons, invade Tamriel, carving a bloody path through Skyrim before turning their attention to Morrowind. And oh great, here it comes. En route to Morrowind, they are stopped by an army of Dunmer led by Almalexia and attacked from behind by the Noids led by the King of Western Skyrim, and once again they revived Rutharth. And for some frickin' reason, the two armies join forces against the Kamal, and then out of absolute nowhere, a phalanx of Argonians shows up and helps the Nords and Dunmer for some reason. They drive the Kamal back, and Vivek summons a flood to finish them off. After this, Skyrim, Morrowind, and Blackmarsh instantly forget their generations of bad blood and hatred for each other and form the Ebonheart Pact. And oh my gosh, this is stupid. Sorry, I just really hate this addition to the lore. This was a retcon made when ESO was released just to make the Ebonheart Pact exist so they could have their 3 factions for their 3 Banners War. Originally, Vivek and Alexia defeated the Kamal by themselves, and it's very stupid and forced. The Nords and Dunmer have hated each other and have been fighting each other since the beginning of their histories, and the Dunmer have been enslaving Argonians for generations. And both this slavery and these wars continue after the pact breaks up. So having this short period of time where out of nowhere they suddenly start all getting along just doesn't make any sense. It also gets worse where you consider... In 576, the Longhouse Emperors have become very unpopular in Cyrodiil, and the people revolt against them. A noble named Vernus Aquarius rallies the people of Western Cyrodiil and overthrows the Longhouse Emperors, and is made the new emperor. In 576, Varen's rebellion sent the imperial noble Erexia Tharn as a diplomat to Elsewhere's kingdom of Anaquai, but she went rogue and used the soldiers under her command to usurp the king of Anaquai. Meanwhile, despite being crowned emperor, Varen was concerned that his rule would not be seen as legitimate since he wasn't a dragonborn. One of his advisors, an Altmer sorcerer named Mannimarco, convinced Varen that if they could find the Amulet of Kings, he could perform a ritual that would convince Akatosh to make him dragonborn. Now, it's worth mentioning that Mannimarco was expelled from the Sigic Order for practicing necromancy and possibly also murder. He was the archenemy of the Mages Guild, and its founder, Vanus Galarian, was known in some circles as the King of Worms, and was one of the greatest pioneers of necromancy and black magic in Tamriel's history. So he was obviously a very trustworthy person. So Varen, along with his chief advisor, Abner Thorn, as well as Mannimarco and 2 of Varen's most trusted companions, Leos Titanborn and Sizahar, set out to find the Amulet of Kings and attempt Mannimarco's ritual. But, surprising absolutely no one, Mannimarco had tricked them, and was actually working with the Daedric Prince Molag Bal the whole time. Mannimarco used the Amulet of Kings to cause an event known as a Soul Burst, which shattered the barrier between Menace and Oblivion. I mean, the barrier should have been gone the second Raymond III was assassinated, thus breaking Alicia's covenant with Akatosh, but okay. This let Molag Bal begin an invasion of Tamriel, as well as starting something called the Plain Meld, where he attempted to merge Nirn with his realm of Cold Harbor with devices known as Dark Anchors. During the Soul Burst, Varen mysteriously vanished, and in his absence, his wife Clivia Tharn became regent, and Mannimarco and Molag Bal began to manipulate her to gain control of the Imperial Remnant from the shadows. At some point, they ended up replacing her with a Daedric servant of Molag Bal, disguised as Clivia, named Molag Kenna. Mannimarco got the Mages Guild banished from the Imperial City, allowing his order of necromancers, the Order of Black Worm, to operate there freely. After the Soul Burst, Sisahar hid the Amulet of Kings away from Mannimarco, but for him and Lyris both ended up getting captured by Mannimarco and his servants and imprisoned in Cold Harbor. After the Soul Burst, Varen lost memory and eventually ended up joining the Moth Priests, the order of Imperial monks that were specially trained to read the Elder Scrolls, using them to see the past and the future. He was eventually discovered and captured by Mannimarco and brought to Cold Harbor. In 579, the pirate queen Fortuna ap Dugla conquers Cyrodiil's coastline, creating an independent kingdom. In 580, the Somerset Isles, Valen Wood, and elsewhere unite to form the Aldmeri Dominion in order to protect themselves and all of Tamriel from the younger and thus more foolish races of men. In 580, a continent-spanning war called the Three Banners War breaks out between the Daggerfall Covenant, Aldmeri Dominion, and Ebonheart Pact, as well as the Daedric-controlled Imperial Remnant and Molag Bal's other followers, over who gets to rule all of Tamriel, more specifically Cyrodiil, more specifically even the Imperial City. With the Dominion wanting to re-establish Elven dominance on Tamriel, the Daggerfall Covenant wanting to re-establish the Second Empire as it was under the Raymonds, and the Ebonheart Pact wanting to ensure their sovereignty. During the Plain Meld, the Fighters Guild turns their attention to stopping the Dark Anchors and fighting Molag Bal's invading forces. And now, after all this, we finally get to the first game in the series chronologically, ESO, a spin-off taking place over a millennia before the main series. Yeah, we still have a long ways to go. In 582, an individual who come to be known as the Vestige is captured by the Order of the Black Worm, and along with other countless individuals, is sacrificed by Mannimarco to Molag Bal. Having their souls stolen by Molag Bal, and used to power the Dark Angers. And the spirit/mind, which is different from the soul in the Elder Scrolls universe, though what each one is kind of complicated. Basically, soul is more life force, and your spirit is more your consciousness. Anyway, the spirit is imprisoned in Cold Harbor, becoming a soul servant. Shortly after the Vestige arrives in Cold Harbor, Lyris leads a slave revolt, freeing the Vestige and Viren and numerous other people imprisoned and enslaved by Molag Bal. The Vestige, with the guidance of Viren, now known as the Prophet, rescue Sai-Sahar and Abnarthon. They then all go to achieve the Amulet of Kings in order to stop Molag Bal. But Manmarco has also discovered the Amulet of Kings location and tries to obtain it for himself. Manmarco reveals that all along he planned to double-cross Molag Bal once he had conquered Tamriel and used the Amulet of Kings, which he believed was a giant, extremely powerful soul gem, to soul-trap Molag Bal, allowing him to steal his power and take his place. However, Molag Bal caught wind of Manmarco's betrayal, and during the ensuing battle between the Vestige and Manmarco, he dragged Manmarco's spirit into Cold Harbor, where he planned to torture him for all eternity as an example to those who would think to betray him. And the Vestige was able to claim the Amulet of Kings. Around the same time, the Fighters Guild destroys a powerful weapon created by Molag Bal known as the Mordum Vividicus. And Shalador reclaimed the Isle of Iadai from Sheogorath and gave it to the Mages Guild as a sanctuary. While all this was going on, Daedric cults dedicated to Molag Bal popped up in Glenumbra, Western Skyrim, Reaper's March, and Ben Curry, and attempted to conquer their respective regions. All of them, however, were defeated. Around the same time, Vamina worshippers attacked Stormhaven, Hircine worshippers attacked Villainwood, and a Boethia cult tries to spread a plague across Morrowind. All of these cults are defeated, however.
Around the same time, the Veiled Inheritance, a terrorist organization of Altmer supremacists and nationalists, conspired with the Daedric Prince Maelens Dagon, and later the Daedric Prince Molag Bal, to seize control of the Somerset Isles from Queen Iran and eventually usurp her and place their leader, High King Lady Estris, on the throne. They too are eventually stopped.
And a clan of vampires tries to conquer Ravenspire using a powerful artifact, but are also defeated. After the five companions recovered the Amulet of Kings, Vanis Galarian and the Vestige call a meeting between the three alliance leaders to convince them to call a truce and unite against Molag Bal. The alliances, however, are too fixated on their war to deal with the literal end of the world, and so the Mages Guild and Fighters Guild join forces to spearhead an attack on Cold Harbor. In Cold Harbor, along with the aid of the Daedric Prince Meridia and the numerous prisoners and slaves of Molag Bal that they liberate along the way, the invasion force destroys the Dark Anchors, besieges Molag Bal's stronghold, and seals the vortex drawing Narn into Cold Harbor, ending the plain mode. After this, Molag Bal focuses his forces on the Imperial City, having his general Molag Kenna retrieve an Elder Scroll hidden away within the White Gold Tower and attempting to use it in a ritual to restart the plain mode. And has another one of his generals, Malavus, seek out and attempt to destroy this Sublime Brazier, which is necessary to relight the Dragonfires, in order to make it so the covenant between Akatosh and Alesia could never be restored. In the end, Kenna and Malavus are stopped, and the Imperial City is liberated by the Vestige, a force of Imperial loyalists, and a member of the Dragon Guard known as the Drake of Blades. And the Drake of Blades, through a ritual, is bestowed great power by Akatosh and made the eternal protector of the Sublime Brazier. After this, the five travel to Heartsgrief, Molag Bal's seat of power in Cold Harbor, in order to defeat him. Abnarthon performs a ritual using the Amulet of Kings to ask the Divines to lend the Vestige their power. I mean, this seems kind of similar to how this whole mess of Molag Bal started, but okay. With the aid of the Aedra and Meridia, the Vestige is able to defeat Molag Bal, releasing all the souls he has stolen up to this point. At some point after the events of the Plain Mode, a religious schism occurs between the Orc tribes that want to worship Malkath and the ones that want to worship his original form of Trinamac. During the schism, Kurag, the king of Orsinium, was killed, and his successor Bazrag was able to restore peace and unify the Orcs, but he also considered leaving the Covenant for a period of time. In the same period of time, a criminal organization known as the Thieves Guild, originating from Hughesbane, a peninsula in southern Hammerfell, grows in influence and begins to spread across Tamriel. Around the same time, the Daedric Triad sought to gain entry into the Clockwork City, a pocket realm created by Silver Sil. Clavicus Vile's servant Barbus steals a staff known as Surinra, an artifact created by Silver Sil that could be used to drain the Tribunal's divinity. The staff eventually ended up in the hands of Karnun Kodala, an Ashlander, the nomadic tribes of Dunmer who followed the old Chimera religion. Kodala used the staff to steal power from Vivek and proclaimed himself Nerevarine, the reincarnation of Nerevar, and planned to unite the Ashlanders and lead them against the House Dunmer, threatening to plunge Morrowind into war. On top of this, Vivek lost most of his strength, which threatened to destroy Vardenfell, since at some point after he achieved divinity, Vivek stopped a massive meteorite from crashing into Vardenfell,
But instead of just destroying it, he decided to use his powers to suspend it in the air forever. Partly just as a flex, but also so his followers have to remain faithful to him because of the implications.
You've said that word implication a couple of times. What implication?
The implication that Vivek might just drop the meteor if his people stop worshipping him. Not that he ever would do that, but they think that he might.
With the help of Azura,
The vestige discredits Cordola's claim as Neverine, retrieves Sunera, and stops Barbas's plans to enter the Clockwork City, and restores Vivek's power. Shortly after that, Nocturnal creates a shadow of Sofa Sil, and steals an artifact known as the Skeleton Key, and tries to use these to take over Clockwork. She is stopped by the vestige and Sofa Sil's followers.
after this, the Triad returns to its plans in the Somerset Isles,
And tricks the leader of the Sijic Order into revealing where he hid the Heart of Transparent Law. The three obtain the heart, but Nocturnal betrays the other two and takes it for herself, planning to use it along with the Crystal Tower in Somerset to become all-powerful.
She is stopped by the Vestige with the aid of the Sijic Order, Sothasil, and Meridia.
After this, Abner Tharn learns of the halls of the Colossus, and
Since the Khajiit love passing down their history in vague and cryptic metaphorical stories,
was led to believe that there was a powerful weapon sealed inside. Tharn opens the halls of the Colossus, hoping to use the weapon to end the Three Banners War.
and accidentally unleashes the dragons sealed inside. Around the same time, Latvulan also escapes his imprisonment.
The dragons form an alliance with Euraxia Tharn till she is slain by the Vestige and Anakwe is returned to Khajiit rule.
Following this, Kalgrundid continues to work with some of Euraxia's former followers to try to obtain the power of the two moons.
But is stopped by the Vestige and banished into the Void. To deal with the dragon threat, Sai-Sahar and the Vestige reform the Dragon Guard, return it to its original purpose in Akavir of hunting dragons.
Around the same time, Latvulan reestablishes the dragon cult in southern Elsewhere and begins to gather life energy from his followers and fellow dragons in a substance known as Aeon Stone. The Dragon Guard allies with Nephilar to stop Latvulan and his cult. They acquire the Mask of Alkosh and have Nephilar empower it, and using that, the Vestige is able to defeat Latvulan. Following Latvulan's defeat, Kalgrundig is able to return to Mundus and uses the power he was able to absorb from Jode's core, along with the power he had stored from his Khajiit followers and fellow dragons, and tries to use the Aeon Stone gathered by Latvulan to empower that energy and amplify it, turning him into a god known as the Dark Aeon. He is stopped by Nephilar, the Dragon Guard, Abner Tharn, and the new queen of Anequia. Later that same year,
The Waking Flame, a cult dedicated to Mayun's Dagon, sought to recover the ambitions to complete Dagon's plan. They uncovered the location of three of them, but they were rescued by the Vestige and brought to Gideon. The Waking Flame tries to take the ambitions by force, leading to a battle between them and the armies of the cities of Gideon and Lanewin. In the end, one of the ambitions, named Destron Brolus, is captured by the Waking Flame and sacrificed to bring Mayun's Dagon into Mundus. However, he is cast back into oblivion upon the defeat of the Waking Flame's high priest, Urtus Vandacia. After this, the Waking Flame and Mayun's Dagon's minions try to conquer the Oblivion pocket realm of Fargrave, and use a device known as a catalyst to turn Mayun's Dagon's Daedric minions into super powerful Daedra known as Incarnate, but they are stopped by the Vestige. During these events, the fourth ambition is discovered, and following this, one of the ambitions, named Sobrin, betrays the other ambitions and attempts to use their combined power to summon Dagon to Narn. The Vestige and the other ambitions defeat Sobrin and use Dagon's neonymic, or true name, basically what he's referred to by in the source code of the universe, to weaken him and banish him. At some point after this, the Steadfast Order, a philanthropic organization, tries to organize peace negotiations to end the Three Banners War. A group known as the Ascended Order attempts to sabotage the negotiations and assassinate leaders of the alliances. Eventually, it's uncovered that Bacaro Valoris, the founder of the Steadfast Society, is actually the leader of the Ascended Order, and that all along he planned to kill the leaders of the alliances, become the prophesized Druid King, unite the Druids of the High Isles under his rule, and destroy all three alliances into remnants of the Empire to usher in a new era of peace under his rule and restore the Druids to their rightful place on Tamriel. Accidentally causes Mount Firesong to erupt and nearly destroys the entirety of the High Isles. At some point after this, Tovasard, a Daedric servant of Athelia, whom Athelia was able to preserve his memory of her, was able to free her with the help of Vermina and Perrier. Athelia then proceeded to invade Tamriel, starting in the West Weald,
and tries to reshape reality and rewrite history and fate, but she is defeated by the Vestige. After her defeat, she goes into self-exile in the Many Paths,
which is a network of paths that connect various parallel universes. And yes, there is a multiverse in the Elder Scrolls universe, but we are not getting into that because we are just not getting into that. Now we are finally done with the events of ESO and can move on. At some point after ESO, the three alliances all crumble. In 730 of the Second Era, Artaeum returns to Narn from its pocket realm. In 830 of the Second Era, the Somerset Isles and Valen Wood unite to create the Second Ordinary Dominion. In 852 of the Second Era, a Colovian warlord named Culicain started a conquest to try to unify the Colovian states, a region which at that point in time included western Cyrodiil and southern Skyrim. During the siege of Old Uldren, a young Nordic general named Talos, according to some accounts he was known as Hjalti Earlybeard at this point in time, shouted down the enemy's fortifications with the Thu'um and led his forces into the city enveloped by a small storm around him, earning him the name Talos Stormcrown. According to some accounts, he was aided in this battle by the spirit of Ysmir Wutharth, and Wutharth continued to aid and advise Talos throughout his military career. After this battle, Talos was summoned by the Greybeards to their monastery, Hrothgar. They had prophesied that a new emperor would arise and defeat the elves and unite Tamriel under a new empire. When Talos approached the Greybeards, they recognized him as Dragonborn and proclaimed him Ysmir, which don't ask me what that actually means, since it's not exactly clear and it's very complicated. All that matters is it's an individual specially chosen by Lorkhan and or Akatosh for a specific purpose, and it's possibly a demigod. Anyway, Culicain's armies eventually unify all of the human kingdoms with the exception of Hammerfell. But just before Culicain could be crowned the new emperor of Tamriel, he was assassinated. Some sources say that Talos had Culicain assassinated, and some sources actually say that he was wounded trying to stop the assassin. But both accounts are from very biased sources, so we don't actually know what happened. After Culicain's death, Talos was crowned emperor, taking the Cyrodiilic name Tiber Septim, and starting the Third Empire. Around this time, the remnants of the Dragon Guard came into the service of Tiber Septim, reforming as the Blades. After that, the Third Empire turned its attention to Hammerfell. Hammerfell fought against the Empire for over a decade till the death of their king, Thrasad II, led to a civil war between the two major political factions in Hammerfell, the Crowns and the Forebears, leading to the Empire conquering Hammerfell through a combination of political maneuvering and military conquest. Later that year, Red Guard rebellions occurred on the Isles of Stras Mackay and Hammerfell's capital of Sentinel. While both these rebellions were unsuccessful in driving the Empire out of Hammerfell, they did lead to the Red Guards being able to negotiate more preferable terms with the Empire. At this point, Tiber Septim had officially united all of humanity under his rule, and he set his sights on conquering the non-human kingdoms of Tamriel. First conquering the Khajiit kingdoms of elsewhere, and as much of Black Marsh as he could before he was forced to stop because the environment and wildlife was too hostile to humans for them to expand farther. In 882 of the Second Era, Vorin Dagoth, now known as Dagoth reemerges, and at some point between first gaining divinity and his reawakening, he went completely insane and delusional. And you know what? How I said that there's going to be a few instances where I have to go into super deep esoteric lore and metaphysics? Yeah, this is one of the places I have to go into that. You see, the entirety of the cosmos in the Elder Scrolls, the Arbus, as well as Anu and Padamai, and Anuel and Sithis, which exist outside of the universe, are all part of a dream of an omnipotent being known as the Godhead, which we all know in actuality is just Michael Kirkbride having fever dreams. Anyway, this means the universe is just a dream and reality is an illusion.
Reality is an illusion, the universe is a hologram, bye gold, bye!
When a being becomes aware of this, one of two things happens. If they can't reconcile the fact that nothing is real with their own existence, they zero-sum and disappear from existence. Many people believe this is actually what happened to the Dwemer. If an individual can fully comprehend the notion that nothing is real while still holding on to the conviction that they exist, they achieve a state of enlightenment known as Chem, where they essentially become lucid dreamers within the Godhead's dream. Vivek is stated to have achieved this state temporarily till he found the burden too much and made himself forget. Dagoth realizes that reality is a dream, but he doesn't come to fully understand what that means. Dagoth concludes that since reality is a dream and he knows that he is in fact real, he must be the dreamer. Dagoth revived the other members of House Dagoth as ash vampires and completely bound himself to the heart of Lorkhan, and from there created a cult around himself as the one true dreamer and one true being. When the tribunal returned to Red Mountain to recharge their divinity, Dagoth ambushed them and stole the tools used to tamper with the heart of Lorkhan. This led to the tribunal slowly losing their power. Around 893, Tiber Septim set his sights on conquering Morrowind. By this point, not being able to draw more power from the heart of Lorkhan had greatly weakened the tribunal, putting the Empire and Morrowind on even footing. After the Empire had several victories and sacked Morwen's capital of Mournhold, both sides realized that this war had no end in sight and would be unimaginably costly for both sides. Tiber Septim and Vivek met to discuss an armistice. Morwen agreed to become part of the Empire and placed under indirect rule, with a figurehead king being appointed by the Emperor, and the Empire would keep a permanent military presence in Morrowind, while the Tribunal and Great Houses got to continue to control local governments and internal policy. In exchange, the Empire agreed to allow certain religious and cultural practices persist as long as they didn't violate the rights of individuals who were already citizens of the Empire. Slavery would remain legal in Morrowind, despite it being outlawed throughout the rest of the Empire. The Morag Tong would be allowed to continue to operate, but only within Morrowind's borders. Necromancy, which was already highly restricted throughout the Empire, was entirely flat-out banned in Morrowind, since the Dark Elves saw it as blasphemous. And the Tribunal Temple was free to persecute Dunmer heretics and worshippers of Daedric princes they considered to be bad, most notably Molag Bal, Mayun's Dagon, Mount Death, and Sheogorath. Yet, the Temple of the Eight Divines and Tribunal were forced to tolerate each other. As a final concession, the Tribunal gave Tiber Septim the Numidium, the deactivated metal god that the Dwemer tried to build, that without the Heart of Lorkhan was pretty much just a giant broken Gundam. The Imperial Battle Mage known as Zern Arctus was able to repair the Numidium and create a power source for it, the machine known as the Mantella, which was imbued with power from Ysmir Ruthoth, or Talos, or Zern Arctus himself, or some combination of the three, with all three of these individuals having some form of connection to Lorkhan, and two possibly being demigods. Anyway, Talos uses the Numidium to conquer the Aldmeri Dominion, and finally bring the entirety of Tamriel under his rule, creating the Empire of Tamriel and beginning the Third Era. Talos and Zern Arctus eventually fought over the Numidium. According to some sources, this is because Tiber Septim was abusing it against political opponents, and other sources say that Zern Arctus wanted power for himself. Both these are from very biased sources, so what actually happened is unknown. Anyway, in the Eastern conflict, Zern Arctus is killed, though because his heart is connected to the Mantella, he doesn't stay dead. We'll talk about it later. And the Numidium is destroyed. You see, Ruthoth, Tiber Septim, and Zern Arctus, who all had connections to Lorkhan, had their essences combined in the Mantella, and because of this, at some point, Tiber Septim combined with aspects of Ruthoth and Zern Arctus to create a new being known as Talos. Not Talos Stormcrown, just Talos. This is a separate being that went on to mantle Lorkhan, essentially taking the spot left by his death among the Aedra and becoming the ninth divine. What was left over from this combination went on to become the undead being known as the Underking. It's a lot more complicated than that, and this stuff mostly comes from Daggerfall and Morrowind, and the lore introduced in those games is very complicated, so I did my best to explain it as simply as I could. At some point, Manmarco, after either being freed from Cold Harbor by the Vestige after they took pity on him, or having escaped from Cold Harbor on his own, returns to Tamriel and begins to rebuild his wormhole. Once Van Sclerian hears of this, he once again becomes the leader of the Mages Guild and leads them to war against Manmarco and his worm cult. The Mages are successful in destroying Manmarco's cult, but Vance is killed in a final confrontation with Manmarco, and Manmarco escapes, laying low in Daggerfall for the next couple centuries. In 120 of the Third Era, Emperor Antiochus Septim died, and his daughter Kintyra Septim II is crowned Empress. But Antiochus' sister Potemia believes her child, Umaril Mantarico Septim, or Uriel Septim III, is the rightful heir and accuses Kintaria of being a bastard child. This leads to a bloody war of succession between the daughter, nephews, and siblings of Antiochus, known as the War of the Red Diamond, which threatened to plunge the entirety of Tamriel into a civil war. Uriel lays siege to the imperial city, imprisoning Kintaria and declaring himself emperor. Kintyra dies in prison 3 years later. 4 years after Uriel sieged the imperial city, he is captured by his uncle, Sepphoris Septim I, who sends him back to the imperial city to stand trial, but on the way he is attacked and killed by an angry mob. Sepphoris is crowned emperor after that, and after another 10 years of fighting, Potemia is killed during a siege of her castle in Solitude, ending the War of the Red Diamond. In 267 of the Third Era, Haemon Cameron, also known as the Cameron Usurper, unleashed an army of Daedra and conquered Valenwood, before turning his sights to Hammerfell. The Empire sent forces to stop him, but they proved ineffective. 18 years later, he is finally defeated by a massive force comprised from several kingdoms of High Rock and Hammerfell. In 339, Pelagius IV is crowned emperor and works hard to mend the empire and fix the division caused by the wars of the past few centuries. In 389, Emperor Uriel Septim VII is betrayed by the Imperial Battle Mage Rhaegar Tharn, who imprisoned Uriel in a plane of oblivion implied to belong to Maegwyn's Dagon, and used illusion magic to impersonate the Emperor. During Tharn's reign, wars broke out all across the Empire. Elsewhere in Valenwood went to war with each other for 5 years. Later on, Valenwood would go to war with Somerset, and Hammerfell, Skyrim, and High Rock went to war with each other for several years. During his reign, Tharn made a deal with Maegwyn's Dagon, allowing him to attack and seize control of the Battlespire, a pocket realm which served as a crossroads between different realms of Oblivion and was used as a training ground for Imperial agents and battle mages. Dagon hoped to use the Battlespire as a launching off point for an invasion of Tamriel. Dagon's plans were foiled by an unnamed hero known as the Apprentice, who defeated Dagon's armies and banished Dagon back to the Void. Around the same time, a being known as Umberkanth, the Spirit of Conflict, is slain by an unnamed hero. And now, finally, after all of this, we get to the first mainline Elder Scrolls game, Elder Scrolls 1 Arena. In 399 of the Third Era, an unnamed hero, who would come to be known as the Eternal Champion, defeats Rhaegar Tharn and saves Uriel Septim VII. Upon being freed, Uriel sets out to fix the damage Tharn caused during his reign. During the same time frame, the Orc chief Gortwag Gronagram, that is the fifth take of me trying to say his name, I am just going to stick with that one, founded New Orsinium and begins to fight for its sovereignty. In 501 of the Third Era, Queen Nuffelga rediscovered the location of the Mantella. Around the same time, the Totem of Tiber Septim, an artifact used to control the Numidium, was also rediscovered and ended up in the hands of the Breton noble Lord Woodbourne. In 404 of the Third Era, Lord Woodbourne assassinates King Lysandus of Daggerfall for interfering with his plans to usurp the throne of Wayrest. Following his murder, King Lysandus' ghost begins to haunt the city of Daggerfall. In 504, the Emperor sends an agent of the Blades to investigate King Lysandus' death, as well as the Mantella and Totem of Tiber Septim. The agent uncovers the truth about Lysandus' death, kills Woodbourne, and recovers both the Mantella and Totem of Tiber Septim. In doing so, they cause a dragon break known as the Warp in the West, in which the Numidium ends up in the hands of several individuals simultaneously before disappearing forever. The kingdoms of Sentinel, Wayrest, Daggerfall, and New Orsinium all acquire the Numidium, and the Blades also acquire it. They use it to defeat their enemies, including each other, in the end causing everyone to be defeated by each other, and resulting in the numerous city-states of the Iliac Bay region being condensed into the four aforementioned kingdoms, with no record of how it happened. During this time, the Underking also acquired the Mantella and used it to finally allow himself to pass on. And Mannimarco also acquired it and used it to achieve godhood, becoming known as the Revenant or the Necromancer's Shade. In 427 of the Third Era, disease-carrying ash storms created by Dagoth spread across Vardenfell. Around this time, Dagoth plants sleeper agents of the Sixth House cult all throughout Vardenfell and begins to work on a second Numidium. Faced with this threat and continuing to lose their power, the Tribunal becomes more reclusive, leading to dissidents and whispers of Nerevarine return spreading among the followers of the Tribunal. Later that year, a former Imperial prisoner who had been recruited by the Blades had been sent to Vardenfell due to them being born under the same star sign that the Nerevarine was prophesied to be born under, with the Empire wanting to ensure that if the prophecy was true, that the one who would fulfill it would be loyal to the Empire. The prisoner fulfills all the requirements of the prophecy and is recognized as the Nerevarine by the Ashlanders and is dubbed Hortator, or a war leader, by the Great Houses. The Nerevarine then reclaims the tools used to tamper with the heart of Lorkhan, destroys the heart, making Dagoth and the Tribunal mortal, and kills Dagoth. With the heart destroyed and the Tribunal losing most of their power, Almalexia goes completely insane and kills Silphasil and almost destroys Mournhold before being stopped by the Nerevarine. Later that year, an event known as the Blood Moon Prophecy occurs, where Hircine comes to the island of Solstheim and conducts a great hunt. During the hunt, the Nerevarine becomes one of his targets, but survives and manages to beat Hircine in combat, ending the hunt. In 430 of the Third Era, with the Tribunal gone, King Heliseth, due to growing pressure from the Empire, outlaws slavery within the province of Morrowind, officially making slavery illegal across all of the Empire. In 433 of the Third Era, Emperor Uriel Septim VII and all of his known heirs are assassinated by the Order of the Mythic Dawn, a cult dedicated to Maegwyn's Dagon created by Mankar Cameron, the son of the Cameron usurper. This was so Maegwyn's Dagon could begin another attempt to invade Tamriel, because this went so well every other time he and Morgbarv tried this. Man, do the Blades / the Dragon Guard suck at their job? Since they've been put in charge of protecting the Emperor, 4 emperors and 2 regents have been assassinated. 2 of those instances, all of the emperor's heirs were assassinated simultaneously as the emperor. 2 times has the emperor went missing for years, only to turn up imprisoned in a realm of oblivion. And 1 time, the regent just goes missing, and they never find her. Anyway, immediately before he dies, Uriel Septim entrusts the Amulet of Kings to a former prisoner that he saw in his dreams. I mean, pretty weird choice to entrust the fate of the world to, but okay. And instructs him to bring it to the leader of the Blades, Joffrey. Joffrey reveals that Uriel Septim had an illegitimate son named Martin, who was a priest in the city of Kavach. The individual from Uriel Septim's dream went to retrieve Martin to crown him emperor, but when he got there, Kavach was under attack by Dagon's forces. They then proceed to save Kavach, drive back Dagon's forces, and rescue Martin, earning them the title Hero of Kavach. However, while the Hero of Kavach was getting Martin, the Mythic Dawn stole the Amulet of Kings. Again, wow! The Blades suck. They had one job, the fate of the world was dependent on it, and they let the Amulet of Kings get stolen. Great job, guys. Great job. The Hero of Kavach finds the Mythic Dawn's hideout, but before they can reclaim the Amulet of Kings, Merethic Era escapes through a portal to a pocket realm of oblivion created for him by Dagon. The Hero of Kavach and Martin Septim force open a portal to Cameron's realm. The Hero of Kavach kills Cameron and retrieves the Amulet of Kings, and he and Martin go to the Imperial City to crown Martin Emperor, but before his coronation, the veil between Oblivion and Nirn is fully torn, and Dagon's legions, along with Dagon himself, enter the Imperial City. Martin performs a ritual using the Amulet of Kings to summon an avatar of Akatosh, who defeats Dagon and permanently reinstates the barrier between Menace and Oblivion. Why Akatosh didn't make the barrier permanent in the first place is beyond me, but anyway, unfortunately, Martin Septim is voiced by Sean Bean, who is contractually obligated to die in every role he plays, so Martin Septim has to be sacrificed in order for this ritual to be performed, ending the Septim dynasty and the Third Era. At some point during the same year, the Order of the Black Worm reemerges, led by either an avatar of the Ascended Mandamarco or a separate version of him that didn't achieve divinity that was created during the Warp in the West, or an acolyte of Mandamarco who took his name. It's unclear. Anyway, the cult tries to call upon the god Mandamarco to empower their dark magic so they can destroy the Mages Guild, but are stopped by the new Archmage of the Mages Guild, who kills the mortal Mandamarco. Later that year, Umil the Unfeathered returns, so the Hero of Kavach recovers the weapons and armor of Pelennor Whitestreak and defeats him. Later that year, Sheogorath opens a gateway to his realm of the Shivering Isles, looking for a champion to aid him during the Great March, an event where Jiggalag temporarily returns and almost destroys the Shivering Isles, only for him to turn back in Sheogorath and rebuild the Shivering Isles from scratch. The Hero of Kavach ends the cycle and declares on Jiggalag. Jiggalag goes off to who knows where, and the Hero of Kavach is dubbed the new Sheogorath. In the early Fourth Era, the Mages Guild is dissolved due to growing anti-magic sentiment among the people of the Empire due to the actions of the Mythic Dawn. In the 5th year of the 4th Era, Bar-Dua crashes into Vardenfell, causing Red Mountain to erupt, decimating Vardenfell and damaging the rest of Morrowind. Yay! Good job, Vivek! Your narcissism caused a nation-spanning apocalypse. You are a good king! After this, Blackmarsh secedes from the Empire and invades Morrowind, seeking retribution for generations of slavery and also stopping the slave trades of House Lavani and House Dress, who ignored the ban on slavery made by King Heliseth. In year 15 of the 4th Era, Orsinium is destroyed again by Hammerfell and High Rock. The orcs flee east, with most of the tribes settling in Skyrim and some rebuilding Orsinium farther into the Rothgar Mountains, apparently not realizing that this just hasn't been working for them. In year 16 of the 4th Era, the High King of Skyrim gave the island of Solstheim to the Dunmer refugees from Morrowind. In 22 of the 3rd Era, the Thalmor, a radical fascist and elfin supremacist political party, basically elf Nazis, take advantage of the instability caused by Dagon's invasion and the end of the Septim dynasty to seize control of the Summerset Isles, renaming them to their ancestral name of Alinor. Later that year, they unite Alinor and Valenwood under their control, creating the Third Elmeri Dominion. In year 22 of the 3rd Era, the Calovian warlord Titus Mede captures the Imperial City and is crowned the new emperor. In year 42 of the 4th Era, Ultima Dissonance, who had fled from Thalmor and the Elmeri Dominion, were massacred by Thalmor agents in Sentinel, leading to tension between the Dominion and the Empire. In year 48 of the 4th Era, the Main of Elsewhere is assassinated. In year 98 of the 4th Era, Nirn's moons Masser and Secunda disappear for 2 years during an event known as the Void Nights. This is devastating for the Khajiit, whose culture revolves around the moons and whose biology is dependent on their phases. In year 100, the moons return. The Thalmor convince the Khajiit that they were the ones who brought the moons back, and Elsewhere joins the ordinary Dominion as a client state. That same year, Artaeum disappears from Nirn once more. In year 122 of the Fourth Era, most of the city of Winterhold in Skyrim collapses into the sea. Citizens blame the nearby college of Winterhold, while the college blames it on an earthquake that was a delayed effect of Red Mountain erupting, even though it's been over a century since Red Mountain erupted. In 171 of the Fourth Era, a war breaks out between the Ordinary Dominion and the Empire when the Thalmor gave the Empire an ultimatum, including several massive concessions by the Empire, including paying tributes, handing land in southern Hammerfell and Cyrodiil over to the Dominion, abolishing the Blades and banning the worship of Talos, as the Altmer didn't like how humanity had deified one of its greatest heroes, and putting him on the same status as the Aedra. Something the Elves would absolutely never do. Sirabane. Fine, Aster. The Emperor rejects these terms, and Thalmor invades Cyrodiil and Hammerfell. By 174, the Imperial City is seized by the Dominion, and Titus Mede II is forced to flee. That same year, while the Empire is busy dealing with the Thalmor, the Reachmen take the opportunity to take the Eastern Reach from Skyrim. In 175, the Thalmor general, Lord Narfin, planned to sacrifice all of the citizens of the occupied Imperial City to Boethia in a Daedric summoning ritual to have Boethia destroy the remnants of the Empire. He was stopped by an agent of the Blades and a forgotten hero. While this is happening, Titus Mede leads the Imperial forces to victory in the Battle of the Red Ring, retaking the Imperial City. In 175 of the Fourth Era, the Elder Scrolls in the Imperial Library mysteriously disappear, being scattered across Tamriel by some unknown force. By 175, the Dominion and Empire are both exhausted from years of war, and with neither side being close to victory, a peace treaty is signed. In exchange for peace and the Dominion returning Imperial territories that it was occupying, the Empire agreed to pay tribute to the Dominion, abolish the Blades, give the Dominion part of southern Hammerfell, and ban the worship of Talos. Now, this treaty was heavily in the Dominion's favor, and was in fact almost identical to the original ultimatum, but what do I know about foreign policy? Feeling betrayed by the Empire, Hammerfell secedes from the Empire and continues to fight the Thalmor, succeeding in driving them out of Hammerfell, something the entire Empire couldn't do. Now, I'm not going to come out and say it, but maybe Titus Mede isn't the best leader. In year 176 of the Fourth Era, desperate to retake the Reach, yet not having forces available due to the cost of fighting the Dominion for so long, the Empire makes a deal with the Jarl of Windhelm, Ulfric Stormcloak. If Ulfric can retake the Reach, the Empire would make Talos worship legal in that region. Ulfric leads a Nordic militia to retake the Reach, driving the surviving Reachmen into the wilderness, where they would eventually reform into the Forsworn Rebellion. After being pressured by the Thalmor, the Empire goes back on its deal with Ulfric. Ulfric refuses to accept this and is arrested by the Empire. He is eventually released, but this worsens the already strained relationship between the Empire and many of the citizens of Skyrim. In 180 of the Fourth Era, the Treaty of Stros Mackay officially ends the war between the Red Guards and the Dominion, with the Dominion fully withdrawing from Hammerfell. In 180 of the Fourth Era, Selmoril Lightbringer, an ancient Aelid sorcerer king, re-emerges and is defeated by a former Blades agent known only as the Warrior. In 188 of the Fourth Era, Wayrest, one of the four major kingdoms of High Rock, is sacked by Corsairs. Later that year, the Brotherhood's Bravos Sanctuary, which was serving as their main base of operations, is attacked and destroyed, with the Listener, the head of the Dark Brotherhood, being killed during the attack. And the tomb of the Night Mother, the matriarch of the Dark Brotherhood, is destroyed. The Night Mother's casket is moved from sanctuary to sanctuary, with each one being discovered and subsequently destroyed. In 201, Ulfric Stormcloak challenges High King Torrig of Skyrim for the throne. Some accounts say Ulfric defeats and kills Torrig in armed combat. Other accounts say he cheated, and other accounts say he killed Torrig in cold blood. But this starts a Skyrim civil war between the Stormcloak Rebellion, who support Ulfric Stormcloak's claim to the throne and want Skyrim to secede from the Empire, and the Imperials, who support Torrig's wife Elisif as the rightful ruler. During the war, Ulfric is ambushed and captured by Imperial forces, along with an unnamed individual trying to cross the border into Hammerfell. Ulfric, the rebels with him, and the unnamed prisoner are all sentenced to death, but before they are executed, Alduin returns to Nirn and attacks the city of Helgen, where they are being held. After the attack, Alduin goes around Skyrim reviving dead dragons and dragon cultists to rebuild his empire. The unnamed prisoner helps kill a dragon terrorizing the city of Whiterun and absorbs its soul, discovering that they are Dragonborn. The Dragonborn then meets the Greybeards and is recognized as Dragonborn by them. The help of former Blade agent and worst Elder Scrolls character ever, Delphine, the Dragonborn discovers the truth about the dragon's return, learns the Shout Dragon Rend, and defeats Alduin. With Alduin's death, Paarthurnax decides to become the new leader of the dragons and tries to teach the surviving dragons the way of the voice and how to overcome their violent and power-hungry natures. Around the same time, a Thalmor agent known as Encarno tries to acquire the Eye of Magnus, but is stopped by the Sigic Order and the new Archmage of the College of Winterhold. Around the same time, the Dark Brotherhood, its last sanctuary, is destroyed by the Pantus Oculatus, the replacement for the Blades. However, a handful of Dark Brotherhood members, including the new listener, survive and make their way with the Night Mother's casket to an abandoned sanctuary in Morthal, where they begin to rebuild the organization and shortly afterwards assassinate the Emperor Titus II. Later that year, towards the growing presence of vampires in Skyrim, a Vigilant of Stendarr reforms the ancient group of vampire hunters known as the
Dawn Guard.
At the same time, the vampire lord Harkon Volkihar plans to use the Aegir artifact Auriel's bow and the blood of his daughter Serana to blot out the sun and plunge Tamriel into endless night. He is stopped by the Dragonborn, as well as his wife and daughter, who both realize that this will lead to an all-out war between vampires and mortals, or past basic elementary school biology and know what the food chain is. Later that year, Miraak attempts to return to Tamriel, but is thwarted by the Dragonborn.
Later that year, Mechanar, a former Clockwork Apostle who was exiled from Clockwork City due to his inhumane experiments, sought out and acquired Barlazar's mazed band, which he used to return to the Clockwork City. Once in the city, he sought to continue his research into creating the perfect life form. He was able to gain access to the source of the city's power, an artificial replica of the Heart of Lorkhan, which he was able to use to gain godlike powers. From there, he began to reconstruct the city and create biomechanical abominations that were pretty much just Cybermen from Doctor Who. He was eventually stopped by the Forgotten Hero.
Later that year, the Dragonborn wants to stop a surviving cell of the Mythic Dawn from opening Oblivion Gate in Skyrim, but ends up being tricked into opening it himself. Dragonborn defeats the cultists and stops the invading Daedra, and that is the final event in the Elder Scrolls timeline as of now. And considering the fact that it's been 10 years since the launch of ESO and 13 years since Skyrim's release, and all we've seen since then for TES 6 is a single announcement trailer that is just a title screen, this might be the very last thing in the Elder Scrolls timeline indefinitely.